Have a little one's birthday coming up? Fat Brain Toys has unique, age-appropriate gifts that really stand out. For over 21 years, this family-run business from Omaha, Nebraska has been creating toys that entertain and educate. They offer child-driven play experiences that keep both the mind and the body active, with options to shop by age or to use their gift bot for recommendations. Like the Plip Kit, perfect for the young builder, architect, or maker who can use the flexible pieces to create cool patterns and designs. Or my personal favorite, Mr. Bendy, a bendable figure with posable arms, legs, eyes, and wax bendy sticks that offer a fun way for kids to explore social and emotional learning. These durable, screen-free toys promote open-ended play, perfect for creative, differently wired kids. I also love the story of how Fat Brain Toys started. Mark Carson built the company after his 10-year-old son Adam couldn't find magnetic building toys online, and the rest, as they say, is history. Today, their website even features a resource center to help parents of neurodivergent and disabled kids find the best toys for their needs. Go to www.fatbraintoys.com/tilt to get 10% off all the items in the Tilt collection when you use the code TILT at checkout. And find out for yourself why Fat Brain Toys is a smarter way to play.
Schools need to understand just because a student could attend an assembly last week doesn't mean he can do it now. Or the fact that they did well on a math quiz or a timed event one time doesn't mean they can do it another day. So it really takes flexibility. And with PDA students, it's all about trusting relationships, that the school can be a safe place for them. And there's adults who can keep their nervous system safe, who can co-regulate with them, that understand them. And that's really non-negotiable.
I'm Debbie Reber, and welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. In today's conversation, I'm thrilled to dive into the much anticipated book, Navigating PDA in America, with its co-authors and thought leaders in the PDA space, Diane Gould and Ruth Fidler. We've talked about PDA in past episodes, but I learned so much from this book, and I'm really excited to share it with you because PDA is a diagnosis bringing clarity and relief to so many families. As it gains visibility and traction in the neurodivergent space, the more we know, the better we can support PDAers in our communities. So in this conversation, we explore the nuances of the PDA profile, how one might determine if the identification fits, where North America stands in understanding PDA compared with the rest of the world, the challenges PDA individuals face in school and how they can be effectively addressed, what type of therapy is best for someone with the PDA profile, and much more. And a little background on my guests. Diane Gould, a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of PDA North America, has a private practice in the suburbs of Chicago where she serves neurodivergent children and adults and their families. Diagnosed as autistic in 2024, Diane has spent over 40 years working for private agencies and school systems. She is on a mission to raise awareness and understanding of PDA in the U.S. Ruth Fidler, an educational consultant with 22 years of experience in autism and PDA, is an expert on emotional well-being. Ruth regularly observes and monitors teaching and learning, supporting staff to embed and refine good autism and SEND practice. She often presents at local or national events and conferences for parents and for a range of professionals. In addition to the book we're talking about today, Ruth has co-authored Understanding Pathological Demand-Avoidant Syndrome in Children, Can I Tell You About Pathological Demand-Avoidance, Collaborative Approaches to Learning, Girls and Autism, and Being Julia. If you want to have a deeper understanding of PDA, you're going to get a lot out of this episode. Here is my conversation with Diane Gould and Ruth Fidler. Hey, Diane and Ruth, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
I will say I've been looking forward to this conversation since I first heard about your book coming out. Usually I get pitched books, and especially from your publisher, Jessica Kingsley Publishing. They do wonderful books in the neurodivergent space, but usually they're alerting me to new books. And when I found out about this book, I'm like, when can I get an advance copy? When is this book coming out? So this feels like a long time coming for me, and I'm just so excited to have you both here. I've already read your formal bio, and we've known each other over the internet for a number of years. But I would love if you could each just take a moment to tell me a little bit more about how you came to be working in this space, kind of wrapped up in your personal why. And then I'd also love to know how you joined together to collaborate on this project. So Diane, would you kick us off?
Sure. I'm a clinical social worker, and I'm one of those people that decided to become a social worker in fourth grade when I read a book on Jane Addams. And I kind of fell into working with neurodivergent kids when I was a kid as a volunteer. And my career grew, and I focused on serving autistic individuals. And I've worked in schools and agencies until I decided I really couldn't have a boss and needed to just work independently. And I focused on serving autistic kids and adults, and then did some focus on trauma. And I think everything that's ever really happened in the disability or neurodivergent world happened because a mother wouldn't take no for an answer. And one of my clients said, "Hey, I heard of this thing. It's called PDA. And you heard of it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I think so. But there's always stuff popping up about autism." So I didn't pay attention. And then she sent me like 100 articles, probably a lot of stuff written by Ruth, until I paid attention and said, "Oh my gosh, I love this. I know these kids. And the approach is what I've been talking about for all my clients with trauma histories who were struggling. And it was just said all better than I've been saying it." So I said, well, I'll learn everything about PDA and hold a workshop, and we'll see if anyone comes. And that was March 2020.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Ruth, I'm so curious to hear more about how you came to be doing this work.
Oh, thank you. And thank you again for inviting me to join you. It's a pleasure to talk with you all today. Interestingly, my start point was not dissimilar to yours, Diane, working in a voluntary basis as a child with other children with additional needs and supporting other children with additional needs through my time in college. And then for maybe 25 years, I worked in schools. I'm an educationalist by training and background, and worked for a long time as a senior leader in a specialist school where we had students between the ages of 5 and 19 representing all different presentations of autism. And I was lucky enough at that time to be working with Elizabeth Newson herself and Phil Christie. In fact, Elizabeth was on my interview panel, and I often think I'm glad I didn't really know who she was. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to even spell my name. I'd have been so starstruck. And then I worked there for a long time and developed a real specialism and an interest in supporting autistic individuals where there was an emotional well-being need that was sort of really particularly dominating for them and was quite impactful. And so developing ways of interacting and engaging them in education and with self-awareness, and developing all the work on PDA approaches. And then for the last 10 years or so, I've been working independently, and I work all across the UK, giving training, consultation, and sort of strategic development work with all sorts of children's services. And then I'll let Diane tell you how come we came to collaborate on the book.
All right, so here's my story with that. 2020 was not a good year for many of us, and it was really a crazy year for me. So I thought, all right, I'm going to set some goals and make some changes in my life. And the main thing I decided to focus on was to just ask for everything I want. And then if I get no's, I get no's, right? So I thought, all right, I really want to write a book, and I want an American PDA book. I'm like, yeah, I've talked to Ruth Fidler once, so maybe I could just reach out to her and ask her if she'll write a book with me. And Ruth very politely said, well, we can have a chat, but quickly, you were on board when I was saying just how badly an American-focused book was needed, that having to only read books that were based in the UK for parents, it was helpful, but it still made them feel really unseen and isolated because the education system was different and the healthcare system and the spelling and our word choices. So it didn't help them feel seen and understood. And Ruth wasn't afraid that I had never written a book before. And she was on board, and we started right away. Took a while, but we started right away. And I'm just so excited about it.
I mean, I learned a lot as well. And I think it's always interesting really getting under the skin of how things are viewed differently in different countries, different legal systems, different education systems. And there's some variation across the UK in that regard, but obviously not as much as between the UK and America. So yeah, that was a really interesting process. And it's good. It's good to stretch ourselves and to learn something new and to go outside our comfort zone. That's good for any of us.
Yeah, my joke, and we'll probably touch on it later, or maybe when we talk about education a bit, is when I was writing about the American education system, Ruth's first comment was, "You can't say that stuff." I'm like, "Oh no, I'm not making it up. It's real. This is how it is." She thought it was fictionalized.
And I want to touch upon that. I was trying to think of when I had Dr. Melissa Neff on my podcast. I had her on probably in the first year of doing the show about neuropsychs. And then she reached out to me and she said, "Debbie, there's this thing that I'm noticing and it's not being discussed in the US at all. I think we need to have like a really deep conversation about it." It might have been like 2018, 2019. And it's just been fascinating to see how, especially in the US, there's just been this rapid increase of understanding and awareness. And this is language now that so many people use. And so I'm just wondering, where do you see North America, the US, in terms of its understanding of PDA in comparison with the UK and Australia too? I know, Christy Forbes is in Australia, and I always kind of thought that's where this originated. This is where the understanding is, and the US is playing catch up. So I'm just wondering, where do you see where North America is right now?
When I hosted that conference in March 2020, it became clear that it wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. And we had to really start an awareness campaign. And PDA North America was formed then. We just became a nonprofit about a year and a half ago. And kind of the first years, I kind of just did it out of my back pocket. But every month I talked to more people and got more calls. And it just was growing and growing and growing. Parents were telling other parents, which is really what was happening. And we began training professionals and really focused on getting the word out. We do this annual conference. So in 2023, Ruth came over and was our keynote, and we had about 300 people. And 2024, we had over 500. And the awareness is spreading. We at PDA North America, which I'm the executive director and founder, we do 2 webinars every month. We have newsletters. We do support groups. And it's really filling a need. And I think that the UK will always be the leader, but I think we're catching up. Schools are rough, but some schools are improving. More and more neuropsychological evaluations are including PDA, but there's still a lot of work to be done. So I think we're doing well.
One thing that is interesting to me, sort of watching the work in America roll out, is that I'm picking up a lot of similar narratives, particularly from families in America who are responding with that. We had the diagnosis of autism, but it didn't quite fit. And I can see that my child's profile has its roots, if you like, in autism. But actually this presentation of their autism is quite distinctive. And particularly when they're then encouraged to try a lot of behavioral approaches that not only are ineffective, but actually seem to make a lot of things worse. It's a bit of a light bulb moment for a lot of those families and professionals to come across the stuff on PDA, because they see these children in front of them. So they're either living with them or they've got them in their school settings or, wherever they're coming across them. So they don't really need convincing of the relatability because they know the individuals. And what I hope for America is, because the UK has been talking about this and writing about this for a very long time now, since the 1980s, and particularly a lot more in recent decades, that actually there is quite a good bank of information out there. There are a lot of publications now. There's the UK PDA Society, there's PDA North America. There are places to go to get that information. And I can remember going out doing training where I took one book and one pamphlet because that's all there was. And now I don't think I could carry all the books to an event, which is really encouraging.
So I think we have such a wonderful opportunity, because now we can kind of build on the experience that the UK has. We have kind of this little international committee, and we can make life easier for individuals and families. Because one of the things we know from the UK is 70% of children can't access school regularly. And in my mind, we now have a chance to change that here. We know what we need to do. And I just feel so grateful and fortunate that we can do that. Because PDA parents in America, as Ruth was saying, they've had the light bulb moment. They've done their own research. They figured out often the hard way what doesn't work and what works. And now we can kind of change that trajectory for them. So as their children are becoming adults, we know how to support them.
It's about stepping away rather from that very behavioral model and helping people to interpret behavior rather than judge behavior.
Yes, and also giving people what they actually need, not giving them only what you think they should need. And that's the big difference, because PDA individuals need a lot of support, and parents need a lot of support. We have that pick yourself up by your bootstraps mentality in America, and the focus on independence and not relying on other people. And that just works against everyone.
Such a good point. I'd love to take a quick break now. And when we come back, I want to ask a little bit more about the presentation of PDA. There are some things I learned in your book that I'd love to dive into a little more. As summer winds down and I kick off a new podcast production season, that means I'm spending many hours prepping for and interviewing guests. I'm finding that the time to shop for and prepare well-balanced meals is slipping through my fingers. That's exactly why I'm so thankful for HelloFresh. HelloFresh can help you save time this fall by making dinner easier and faster than ever. Skip the meal planning and those last-minute grocery store runs with easy-to-follow recipes and pre-portioned ingredients delivered fresh to your door. Just choose your delivery day, open your box, and start cooking. Or, in my case, get your husband to start cooking. HelloFresh also has something for everyone in the family. Their line of kid-friendly options means even the pickiest of eaters will be part of the Clean Plate Club this back-to-school season. And Green Chef, another sponsor of the show, is now owned by HelloFresh. And I love switching between the brands to enjoy an even wider selection of meal plans. And now my listeners can enjoy both brands at a discount with me. And for a limited time, kids eat free. Go to HelloFresh.com/tiltkids to unlock this exclusive offer. 1 free kids meal per box for 2 months while your subscription is active. That's free kids meals just by going to HelloFresh.com/tiltkids. HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit.
Earning your degree online doesn't mean you have to go about it alone. At Capella University, we're here to support you when you're ready. From enrollment counselors who get to know you and your goals, to academic coaches who can help you form a plan to stay on track. We care about your success. and are dedicated to helping you pursue your goals. Going back to school is a big step, but having support at every step of your academic journey can make a big difference. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
I'm Sandra, and I'm just the professional your small business was looking for. But you didn't hire me because you didn't use LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn has professionals you can't find anywhere else, including those who aren't actively looking for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role, like me.
In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you'll miss out on great candidates like Sandra. Start hiring professionals like a professional. Post your free job on linkedin.com/achieve today.
So you were talking about PDAs being a presentation of autism, which I have known. And there was still something in the way that you described it in your book that I understood it in a different way. I think when I thought a presentation of autism, I was interpreting that as autistic with these extreme avoidant behaviors. And you wrote that children with PDA tend to use socially strategic ways to avoid demands and expectations. Another thing that jumped out at me is that a lot of PDA people, kids, have seemingly good social skills, but they often lack a deeper social understanding. So can you tease that out for us a little bit more, this idea of it's not just this extra piece, but it's a whole different presentation of autism?
Well, I think we would expect to see those core characteristics of autism in a PDA. So there's key differences in social communication and social interaction, in information processing and being more of a narrow, detailed processor, and also in sensory sensitivities. So we would anchor those things in place. But what you're then looking at is how they present is still quite distinctive and unique. So, of course, there's that old saying, isn't there? When you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. And the same is true across the spectrum. That's why I wanted to make that point about interpreting individuals rather than judging them or having fixed ideas of what to expect of their autism. So when you talk about the ways of avoiding, it's more sophisticated, if you like, and it's more social than just saying no. I mean, you might get a refusal, but actually you're more likely to get something that is related to distracting an adult or acknowledging that an adult is asking you to do something. So it's not that the young person doesn't know that, but they'll find some kind of reason, however believable or not that is, why they can't do it because they're terribly busy doing something over there. It might be that they will procrastinate and put off starting something or renegotiate the renegotiations, often to the point where the supporting adults can't really remember where they started or even why they started sometimes. And some PDAs will describe that as a representation of them feeling a little bit uncomfortable or torn about wanting to be able to cooperate with whatever the request is, and maybe even knowing internally that actually that is within their capability, but they're not able to do it in that moment. So they're trying to protect their social relationships in that regard. And that's also why some of those strategies of being very, very rigid in you're going to do this first, then that, don't really work because they don't allow for flexibility for our PDAs. And although there are some, what you described there, I think from the books, seemingly good social skills, social understanding, compared to other autistic profiles, actually there's still some differences there. And if I think of some of the adult PDAs I know, they will still say things to me when I might take them out for lunch or something. Oh, how long will we be out? Or if I go round to somebody's house, and they've invited me, by the way, they might say, how long will you be staying? When will you be leaving? Just to sort of still need some of that guidance through those to navigate that social world. So we would still expect to see those core characteristics, but in a different way and with a different emphasis.
And I think, Debbie, to add on the points you made, contribute to PDAers not being recognized and understood as struggling. because their understanding of the expectations socially, interactively, can mask so easily their level of anxiety and that they're struggling. So their needs don't get met because of that.
If I can just add one more note in there as well, is that I think it's helpful to understand PDA, firstly, as a profile of autism, but secondly, as a hypersensitivity to any demands or expectations. And what's really important to remember about that hypersensitivity or that over-responsiveness is that it can be triggered by something external, which might be a parent or a teacher saying, oh, can you do this or come over here, put that there. But it also might be triggered by something internal. So that could be a sensory experience of some kind. And it could also be something that a young person might feel that they want to do, but as soon as they've recognized it as a goal, even if it's one that they've chosen for themselves, that is responded to as if it was an expectation.
And we often forget how cumulative stress is. We kind of focus on antecedents or triggers, which are last straws, and not how stress builds up in the body.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that is such a good point, that it can be that internal drive, that it can be something that is imposed on themselves. It's just really important to understand that. So since PDA has come into awareness, at least here in the US, my community is parents of neurodivergent kids, many of whom are autistic, ADHD, and very complex neuro profiles. And PDA for so many families has been like, this explains everything. That's my kid. My kid is demand-avoidant or has a persistent desire for autonomy, whatever language you want to use. And so you wrote in the book that estimates are that 1 in 25 autistic people have PDA. That's not a huge percentage. You said it's still kind of a rare neurotype within the autism community. And I also know that kind of inherently with anxiety and other parts of the autism profile, pushing back against demands is also normal. I just would love to know your thoughts. I think for so many parents, this language has given them a huge sigh of relief. Like, okay, this is what's going on because my child can't handle any demands. And are you finding that there are more people that are kind of gravitating towards the PDA diagnosis, or it feels like a fit, that it may not actually be an accurate diagnosis or identification for their child? Like, is it being overrepresented?
Without seeing numbers, unknowing individuals, it's very hard to comment in a useful way about that. But there's always a risk of that, of course. Phil Christie, my friend and colleague, describes it as we need to maintain the integrity of the PDA profile so that it doesn't then become so diluted that it sort of loses its meaning. I think there is a large group, particularly post-pandemic, of autistic people who are very anxious. And as you've pointed out, when any of us is anxious, we can be demand avoidant. And we tend to be more demand avoidant the more anxious we are. So if we are supporting somebody who is autistic and highly anxious, some of the style and the ethos of the approaches that Diane and I talk about might be highly relevant and supportive to them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have a PDA profile. And the way that I would expect that to unfold is because if you have somebody who's highly anxious, autistic, and then you put in things in place that are going to offer them a degree of certainty with flexibility and support their emotional well-being and their self-awareness, you would see a significant decrease in that demand avoidance. Now, if you put those things in place for a PDA, you still might see some decrease in demand avoidance, but you wouldn't see quite such a profound impact. And you certainly wouldn't necessarily see a reduction in those internally generated demands that they are responding to, because that is still part of their neurology.
That makes absolute sense. So thank you for that. Let's take a quick break, and then I want to talk about some of the other things you talk about in your book regarding school and education. I'd love to get into that.
The Volvo XC60 plug-in hybrid is about performance, not just on the road, but in life. With not only trunk space, but room to make memories. It's electric with a backup plan where the only speed that matters is how fast you can slow down. The Volvo XC60 plug-in hybrid. Performance where it matters the most. Visit volvocars.com/US to learn more.
After countless steps and more than a few miles, your dog drives you forward one last time to make that final climb. And as the rising sun peeks out from the horizon, you know, incredible happens here because it starts here. With the fuel that makes it all possible, Pro Plan Sport. Discover advanced nutrition made to fuel strength and stamina in active dogs like yours at ProPlansport.com.
This episode is brought to you by Jira. Ever wonder how those big marketing campaigns that make headlines get delivered on time? It all starts with Jira, the only project management tool you need to plan and track work across any team. Every step of that campaign is organised in one place, from launching the campaign all the way back to designing ads and writing creative briefs. Get started on your next big marketing campaign idea today in Jira.
Let's talk about school. This is something that comes up so often in my community. So many parents who are raising a PDA child feel that school is just an impossibility. Like, how do we take this kid and find an educational system that works for them? So I would love to know if you have some best practices for how parents with kids who have PDA, how they can think about how to even approach their child's education and schooling.
It is hard. And PDA North America, we've been working on a self-paced learning module for school staff that we're hoping to roll out later this fall, because getting schools trained makes such a difference. I personally have done a bunch of training for individual schools, pushed by parents who convinced their school administrator to get trained. I talk a lot to schools about an hour, 2-hour training, and then going back to doing what you were doing before really isn't the answer to supporting these kids. I do think it's possible for schools to support PDA students, but it takes a much more flexible approach than many schools are used to doing. We're very based on rewards and consequences. And some progressive schools have gotten away from consequences. But what we know about PDA students, that tons of positive reinforcement also builds pressure. And that's not the answer. Schools also have to be flexible in starting times and attendance, because one of the things we've learned from PDA adults in the UK is that recovery time is necessary. It's not a luxury. And capacity changes from day to day, from hour to hour, and it can change from minute to minute. Schools need to understand just because a student could attend an assembly last week doesn't mean he can do it now, or the fact that they did well on a math quiz or a timed event one time doesn't mean they can do it another day. So it really takes flexibility. And with PDA students, it's all about trusting relationships, that the school can be a safe place for them. And there's adults who can keep their nervous system safe, who can co-regulate with them, that understand them. And that's really non-negotiable. And training helps, but you have to have that culture and leadership who buys in to that it's not really all kids have to be treated the same. And even recognizing the needs of kids who might not have a medical diagnosis, and listening to parents who are saying, I know you're not seeing this at school, but the moment I pick her up, she falls apart and then stays in her room until the next morning. That there has to be that partnership and level of trust. So there's a lot of work to do, and it's not like a one and done mentality.
The advantage of that is that actually it's not a lot of very expensive equipment that needs to be purchased. It's actually a shift in attitude and ethos. And some of the most striking things that some students have said to me over the years have been when they are in a good placement that is flexible and creative and looks after their emotional well-being and builds trusted relationships, etc., that they will say, I've never been to a school before where the staff like me. And I've never been to a school before where whatever sort of day I've had, whether it's been good or bad, I actually don't mind coming again tomorrow.
Yeah. And making that distinction between like going to school and learning. And generally PDA kids love to learn, and school can get in the way of that, which is really sad. And that's not what we want.
Yeah, as we said earlier, 70% of young people in a survey conducted by the PDA Society in the UK could not tolerate the school environment or were home educated. And I know that a lot of these kids do end up being home educated or unschooled. For listeners who are in that boat, who are homeschooling or unschooling their kids with a PDA profile, do you have any guidelines for making that work? Because you would think that, well, I have complete control. It's just let my kid do what they want and it's all fine. But it isn't that easy. Do you have any best practices?
I would think getting support, building community, and generally PDA students who have to leave school because it's not working are sad at giving up just being with other kids. So building homeschool, unschool communities so the kids have other kids to learn with can make a huge difference. And parents have other people, because it's the isolation, I think, that makes a difference too. I think some families are in the position to homeschool, even if they really would rather not, just because the rigidity of the starting times, the getting out the door to go to school. And if schools were more flexible with attendance, that would make a big difference too. I think following the kids' lead and interest is a wonderful opportunity for homeschool families to have experiences instead of worksheets. There's all kinds of wonderful things that can come out of it. And every family has different needs too.
I think it's also important to recognize that not all families are in a position realistically or organizationally or financially to be able to do that. And so those are other pressures on some families, and that homeschooling your children, actually, if that's not something you've done before, and that's not something you set out as an active choice when you became a parent, can be quite a daunting task for some people. I think there might be some PDAs who need a period of just really quiet recovery if they've hit burnout, and that is entirely understandable and right and proper. They will still need whatever support is going to be relevant for them to get through that period. But I think more broadly and maybe strategically, which is what I wonder whether you were asking about in your question, is that I feel that it's really important, while children are children, that their options in life are not shut down any more than is necessary, so that they have a life that is really starting to open out in front of them, not be limited. And in that regard, I think it's important, as Diane says, to have that learning community and those social opportunities. but also to not have that narrative of school didn't work for you. You don't go to school anymore, when a child might only be 10 or 12, because actually things can change. So just keeping an open mind and not shutting down those opportunities for young people, I think is helpful too.
And it'd be nice for parents to feel it's a choice, not something they have to do.
Yes, I feel very seen in that comment because I definitely was one of those reluctant homeschoolers. And I homeschooled for 6 years and ended up loving it at the end of the day, but I wasn't there right away for sure. And it isn't an option for everyone. So I appreciate you pointing that out as well. So a few months ago, I did an episode on the show about the limitations of traditional therapeutic modalities with neurodivergent people, including the fact that CBT and DBT isn't always an effective approach for complex humans. And I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit about what you found when it comes to PDA, if there are any types of therapies that can be more supportive of people who are living with this persistent desire for autonomy.
I'm kind of old I'm really old, and I'm old fashioned, I think, too. And I've been a therapist for a long time. To me, what works is just basic relationship-based attunement with another human being and being non-judgmental and believing in self-determination and just really like being genuine in terms of a trusting therapeutic relationship. Just the basics, I think, is what works for PDAers of any age. And I think it might look different in terms of lowering demands and having many more missed appointments and having flexibility and not focusing on accountability or even rehashing behavior, really letting the individual control the sessions and the topics. I think it's a beautiful thing to partner with another human being on, I always call it with my clients, the road to self-understanding. And that is a wonderful gift to be able to give or join with a person, because it's so helpful for a PDAer of any age to really understand themselves. I think people starting therapy or parents of children starting therapy have to realize you got to be in for the long haul. It is not a short-term fix, and they might not see any differences. And it can't be about changing the person and making them more compliant. So a lot is, I think, managing those expectations. I also think that some of the trouble with traditional therapy is that it's a kind of top down, not bottom up. And it has limited success because of that.
I appreciate you answering that question, that the relationship-based attunement, I think that's where it has to start. And listeners, I'm going to have a link to that episode that I referred to. It was with Dr. Megan Ananeff and Dr. Deborah Browse. I'll have that in the show notes as well. So definitely listen to that. I want to just kind of recap. The book, first of all, for listeners, is Navigating PDA in America, a framework to support anxious, demand-avoidant autistic children, teens, and young adults. It came out this summer. It's a book I was very anxious to get my hands on, and it really is very comprehensive. It's an easy read as well. So however you work to collaborate together, I think the final product is just exactly what so many parents need. As a way to wrap up, could you each share with me your greatest hopes or goals for what this book does in the world? Ruth, why don't you kick us off?
Thank you. Well, I just hope that it reassures people and that it opens their eyes a bit to what is happening with some of these young people so that they don't feel on the edge. They don't feel isolated. They don't feel that they are perplexing and mysterious, and they feel totally included and accepted. It's nice to hear that you said you found it quite easy to read, because one of the things that Diane probably got bored of me saying when we were writing is, if you've got something interesting to say, you should be able to say it in a very straightforward way, in a short sentence with sort of plain speaking language. We wanted to write something that was really accessible, and we wanted to write something where busy people, whether those are professionals or parents, can pick it up and just read a little section or read a chapter. And then lastly, the other thing I just will say is that there is a link on the Jessica Kingsley Publications website. You don't have to buy the book. You can download for free some of the guides and pro formas that are in the book if people would find that helpful.
I know for me, one of my motivations to write the book is there's still non-believers. Like, I wanted parents to be able to see it's like a real thing. There's a book. We have a book. And for them to feel seen, and that their life and their struggles, they're real, they're out there. And also for professionals to feel that they can serve these kids, they can educate them, they can treat them as therapists, and psychologists can diagnose kids as autistic with a PDA profile, kind of giving permission for professionals to get on board and serve all these individuals who have been just on their own and struggling.
Yeah. And as you both were sharing your greatest hopes for the book, what I haven't said that I think is really important for listeners to know is that the book is actually full of hope. So I think so many parents, this feels like a lot to be dealing with, right? If you have a child and you're recognizing this is what's going on, and it is a lot to deal with. It is something that's misunderstood and other people don't get it. And it can be very challenging, but there is so much hope, and that really does come through in the book. So I just wanted to make sure listeners know that too. There are paths forward. There are ways to really support people with PDA and kids with PDA so they can really grow up and lead self-determined lives that are fulfilling. So thank you for that.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, of course. Is there a place you want listeners to go to check out the book? I will have a link to what you just mentioned, Ruth, with the publisher in terms of those resources, but anywhere else on social media or anything you want people to know about?
Well, I'm hoping people will go to their local independent bookstore and ask them to order Navigating PDA in America. And the PDA North America website is a good place to hear about all kinds of PDA resources as well.
I would agree that PDA North America is the most relevant place for your audience. But if there is anybody listening who's outside America and who is in the UK, the PDA Society would be where you would go. And there are all sorts of links on the PDA Society website to research papers. There's an inquiry line, and there are lots of free to download resources.
Wonderful. So listeners, as always, there'll be a lot of links in the show notes page for this episode. So if you want to dive deeper into PDA, definitely go to the show notes. And Diane and Ruth, first of all, thank you so much for being here today, for going over. I'm so ambitious about how short I'm going to keep these conversations, but we got into it. So I appreciate your time, and congratulations again on writing your book and getting it out into the world.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So excited to be on the show.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. To learn more about today's guest and the resources we talked about, check out the extensive show notes page on Tilt Parenting. There you'll find key takeaways, links to all the resources mentioned, and even a full transcript of our conversation. Just go to tiltparenting.com/podcast and select this episode. If you're looking for personal support from me and connection with the phenomenal community of parents raising neurodivergent kids, join us in the recently rebooted Differently Wired Club. The new Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Go to tiltparenting.com/club to learn more. The Tilt Parenting Podcast is hosted by me, Debbie Reber, author of Differently Wired and the founder of Tilt Parenting, and was edited by Andrea Curtis Amasquita. To support this show, please join my Patreon campaign where you can set up a small monthly contribution. Just go to patreon.com/tiltparenting to learn more. If you want to follow Tilt on social media, you can find us at @TiltParenting on Instagram and Facebook. And lastly, please take a minute to leave a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. That helps this show stay visible so others can find it more easily. And that's all for this week. Stay safe, stay well, and take good care. And for more information about any of the parenting resources Tilt offers, visit tiltparenting.com.
Are you a parent in need of a laugh and a little escape? Look no further. Parenting is a Joke is the podcast you've been waiting for. Hey, I'm Ophira Eisenberg. I'm a stand-up comic and parent. And each week I chat with one of my top comedian pals who, just like you, are juggling careers, busy lives and schedules, and raising a family. You can expect candid stories, hilarious mishaps that happen on stage and at home, and just a lot of laughs. There's no expert advice here. Well, actually, sometimes a good idea does sneak its way in, but mostly just pure, relatable fun to remind you that we're all in this parenting adventure together. New episodes of Parenting is a Joke drop every Tuesday, so tune in, get ready to laugh, unwind, and maybe even feel a little bit better about your own parenting. Because sometimes that's exactly what your therapist, pediatrician, and bartender ordered. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform.